Hello and welcome back to the second part of your physiology chapter. In this video, we will talk about the cardiovascular system. So actually, if we take a look at this word, we can assume that cardio would mean something regarding the heart and vascular would mean something regarding the vessels. So we will take a look at the physiology of the heart and the blood vessels within the human body. So just as we did in the blood video, we are going to talk about the basic functions again. So the cardiovascular system, again also with the blood, helps in the delivery of oxygen, nutrients, and hormones, in the removal of metabolic wastes, also in the protection from infection and blood loss, and in the maintenance of a constant body temperature. So we would say that it's quite similar to blood, since the cardiovascular system's main role is transporting and pumping the blood throughout our body. So the functions kind of overlap over here. So let's quickly talk about the heart. This right here is a very, very simple picture of a heart. We have four main chambers over here, and these chambers are representing actually the heart. Then I also want you to know that on this side over here, we have the body. So everything else, your arms, your fingers, your brain, everything. And on one side, we have the lungs. So all the blood that's going to the lungs. And we then divide that. We can say that our body has two circulations, the pulmonary and the systemic circulation. In regards to the heart, we have four chambers. We have the upper chambers, which are the right atrium and the left atrium, so rechter und linker Vorhof. And below that, we have the right ventricle and the left ventricle. You can see that actually between the atria, so the right atrium and the right ventricle, there's a connection, and between the left atrium and the left ventricle, there's a connection. This connection is called a valve. So now I want us to follow the blood flow. So the blood arrives to the heart at the right atrium, where it comes from the body to the vena cava. The vena cava is the biggest vein, where we have oxygen poor and CO2 rich blood, so blood that has also already with the nutrients been utilized in the periphery of the body. So all the nutrients are out, and this blood now arrives to the heart after it has done everything it needs to. So it arrives at the heart through the vena cava and then actually moves through the right atrium. In the right atrium now, it is then being pushed through this valve. And this valve is what we call the tricuspid valve, the first heart valve over here. After passing the tricuspid valve, we are in the right ventricle. And the right ventricle is now then through the pulmonary valve, because it goes to the pulmonary artery, and between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery, there's the pulmonary valve. We will pump the blood through the lungs, to the lungs. Now the blood is from the right ventricle been sent to the lungs, and in the lungs now, the oxygen poor CO2 rich blood is now given more oxygen. So in the lungs we have the gas exchange going on, so we are putting oxygen in the blood, removing the CO2, and now through the pulmonary vein, oxygen rich blood, CO2 poor blood, is sent to the left atrium. From the left atrium on, we will move through the left ventricle by means of the mitral valve over here. So there's the third valve. From the left ventricle, which is actually very strong, we will now go through the aortic valve to pump the blood to the aorta, the main artery of the body. And then from there on, the blood will go to everywhere in the body, and then it will be used again. When it's used, it will be sent to the right heart, to the right atrium, then to the right ventricle, to the lungs, then it's been given oxygen again, sent to the left atrium, left ventricle, to the body. And this is the circulation of the blood in the heart. I also want to again make the important distinction that we have two circulations. We have the pulmonary circulation, where we have the circulation from the right heart, so right atrium and right ventricle, to the lungs, and from the lungs back. And then we have the circulation to the body. And this is a systemic circulation to the body, and the pulmonary circulation from the right heart to the left heart. So we have the smaller right heart to left heart circulation, with the only interceptors being the lung, and the left from the left ventricle to the body, so the left circulation, the systemic circulation. And then it's also important to remember that the right heart has to pump against least resistance because there's only the lung as organ. So it's actually not as strong as the left one because the left one has to provide the blood for the whole body, the whole systemic circulation. So now let's actually take a look at types of blood vessels. What are blood vessels? There are actually three major types. We have arteries and we have veins. We can say that arteries are mainly the vessels that are actually transporting oxygen-rich blood. So we have arteries, those are the big ones over here, and then they get smaller and smaller. So you start with your aorta and then the blood vessel moves, let's say, to your hand, and somewhere then the artery gets smaller and it will become an arteriole. And then in the end, in your fingertips, it will become a capillary. As you can see over here, a capillary is let's say, a mixture of artery and vein, because it actually is interconnected. This is actually where the artery then will become a vein. So the capillary bed, let's say, is where actually the blood is being used up. So the oxygen is used, the CO2 is put there, and then from capillary we have the venule, the small vein transporting the blood back, when it then will go to the vena cava again, to the right heart, go through the lungs, go through the left heart, through the systemic circulation, and then we will end up here again. So this is actually the last part again. So let's take a look about the makeup. So if we would take this artery and just slice it in the middle, we would have something like this. In the middle, there's a lumen where actually the blood is flowing. Then we have the inner layer, which is a lining for the lumen, so the blood cannot escape. Then there's a middle layer, and as you can see over here in arteries, it's actually quite thick, and this is made up of muscle. If you feel with your hand on your arm just below the thumb and then scoot down like a bit more, you can feel your radial artery, and you can see that it's actually pumping. So there are some muscles also helping here, and the blood is being transported by the pumping of the heart and also with the contraction of the middle layer of the arteries towards the capillaries. And then there's also the outer layer just for protection again. If we take a look at the vein over here, if we cut the vein and we cut it at a very specific place where we have this inner lining, which is a bit thicker, so we can see that there is this thing over here, and this is actually also a valve. This valve, because veins, you can see the middle layer is not so thick, so there's no muscle, there's no active pumping from the vein itself. So we need something to help us that the blood does not go with gravity down the legs, for example, and we will have the valves that will stop the backflow of blood. The blood from the legs is mainly moved towards the heart again with actually movement of the leg muscles. So if you walk, the blood is being pumped back because the veins itself, it's not feasible for them. And the fun fact actually is 65% of your blood is always situated in veins. So we say around 5 liters of the whole blood and 65% is situated in veins. So we need something to prevent the backflow over here. So let's summarize this quickly, the type of blood vessels. For arteries, we have a thick outer wall. We do have thick layers of muscle and elastic fibers in the middle. And we have a small lumen, relatively small lumen. While in veins, we have a fairly thin outer wall, we have a thin layer of muscle and elastic fibers, and we have a large lumen. In this cut section, it appears that the lumen is quite small, but that's because there's a valve. Remember, the valve is not everywhere. There are specific sections where there are valves and where there are not. So it's a large lumen. And capillaries have a very, very small lumen. So now let's talk about how the heart is actually pumping the blood throughout the body. And this is what we call the cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle consists of two phases. We have the systole and the diastole. The systole is where the heart is actually contracting. So the muscle of the heart contracts. The heart is basically a thick muscle. It contracts and pumps the blood into the arteries. In the diastole, the heart muscle relaxes and the heart fills with blood. We know that we have systole and diastole, so systole pumping of the heart, diastole relaxing and again filling the heart with blood from the veins. The stroke volume is the expulsion of blood per stroke of the heart. So volume of blood pumped from left ventricle per heartbeat. And this is approximately 70 milliliters. So with each heartbeat of yours, around 70 milliliters of blood is being pumped into your circulation. Now, from that, we can calculate something very important, that is the cardiac output. And the cardiac output is the heart rate times the stroke volume. So we said that the stroke volume is around 70 milliliters. And let's say that your heartbeat at this time is 70 beats per minute. If we take 70 beats per minute, so the normal heartbeat is around 60 to 100 beats per minute. So let's say 70. If we take 70 beats per minute times 70 milliliters, it's 4,900 milliliters. So you have approximately 5 liters of blood being pumped in a minute in your body. And if you remember, that's basically the amount of blood you have in your body. So the heart is actually pumping a lot of blood around at all times in your body. This is actually what we are talking about, the contraction and the pumping of the blood. What you probably also already heard about is the heart conduction system. If we take an ECG or an EKG in medicine, we can actually take a look at those waves on the paper, and this doesn't tell us really something about the contraction of the heart, but rather of the electric currents in our heart. The muscle of the heart is actually paced by this electric current. And there are different pacemakers that set the rhythm for our heart and the frequency. And there's the first one, which is the sinoatrial node, the SA node, which is the primary pacemaker. This is the guy over here, and he's located actually in just in the upper pole of the right atrium, and he spontaneously produces an electrical impulse around the frequency of 60 to 100 impulses per minute, and this is then transferred throughout the whole heart to actually then give us our cardiac frequency. Then just below that we have the atrioventricular node, and he's actually just between the atria and the ventricles on the heart, and he actually delays the signal from the SA node. So there's a signal sent from the SA node to the AV node, and between the SA node and the AV node is yes, correct, there is actually the atria. So the atria will contract when the electrical impulse is sent here. And before it just goes further and the ventricles contract, the AV node will just delay the signals. So the atria and ventricles do not contract at the same time. Because first the atria have to contract, then pump the blood to the ventricles, and then the ventricles have to contract and pump them to the lungs or the systemic circulation. So it's very important that the AV node actually delays the signal for a bit. Then below that we have actually the bundle of His, and then again also the Purkinje fibers, and these just go all the way along the ventricles, the right ventricle and the left ventricle, and yield to a complete ventricular contraction when sending or implying their electrical impulse. So we said that the sinoatrial node gives a frequency of around 60 to 100 a minute. So what would actually now happen if the sinoatrial node dies? So for example, we have a cardiac infarction, so a myocardial infarction, and for some reason there's now a scar on here and the sinoatrial node doesn't work. Actually, the AV node would be able to take over this role. But the AV node itself, since remember it delays signals, it's a bit slower than the primary pacemaker, the sinoatrial node. It's a bit slower, around 30 to 40 impulses a minute. So it can help a bit, but it might not be enough to actually be enough for survival. So this is what we call the secondary pacemaker. Whenever the SA node is not working, the AV node can take over the role to a bit. So since we said that the sinoatrial node has a frequency or gives a frequency of electrical impulse from 60 to 100 a minute, there has to be something that then actually controls this. Because when you start running or exercising, your heart beats faster. When you are sleeping, your heart beats slower. Or when you're an athlete and you're just used to intense sport and cardiac activity, you can also have a resting frequency pulse that is just low. And this is where we have the autonomic regulation of the heart. The autonomic regulation of the heart is the regulation of the frequency of the heart due to two things. We have a sympathetic and parasympathetic autonomic regulation of the heart. Sympathetic, I want you to remember fight and flight. When you are in the jungle and you see a venomous snake. You see a big animal that can hurt you. Your eyes, you are frightened, you are scared, your adrenaline will go up, and this will lead into increased accelerated heartbeat because you will need more blood. You will need more blood at any time because you now have to utilize everything you have to keep on surviving. And then on the other side, we have the parasympathetic. This is mainly through a big nerve in your body, called the vagus nerve. It's actually a cranial nerve, the 10th cranial nerve. And what I want you to think here is rest and digest. So when you are at home, you just ate something, a nice pizza, and then afterwards, you pretty much, you feel like you could go for sleep, you could go into the coma. This is rest and digest. And this will actually decelerate, slower our heartbeat to give us more time to lay down, give us time to digest our food and just relax. So now I just want to quickly summarize everything we just said. So we said that the functions of the cardiovascular system are the delivery of oxygen, nutrients, hormones, metabolic waste removal, protective functions, and the body temperature maintenance, just as blood. The pulmonary and systemic circulation are distinct from one another, and the progression of blood through the body is through the vena cava, the big vein, through the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, to the right ventricle, to the pulmonary valve, through pulmonary artery, to the lungs, to the pulmonary vein, to the left atrium, to the mitral valve, to the left ventricle, aortic valve, through the aorta, and through the body. We said that there are actually 3 types of blood vessels. We have the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. The arteries have a thick outer wall, thick layer of muscle, elastic fibers, and a small lumen, while the veins are rather weak and have a large lumen. The capillaries are very small, and there is actually where the blood is being used. We said that the cardiac output can be calculated as the heart rate times the stroke volume. So if you actually then need higher cardiac output, for example, in a fight or flight response, we can increase the heart rate because this will increase the cardiac output, so the blood per minute being pumped to the body, or we can also just increase the force of contraction from the heart to then increase the cardiac output. The conduction system of the heart is actually what we can take a look at with the ECG, and we have the primary pacemaker, the SA node, the secondary pacemaker, the AV node, the bundle of His and Purkinje fibers that are then actually transferring the electrical impulse through the whole heart to give contraction. And at the AV node, the impulse is actually delayed so that the atria are contracting just earlier of the ventricles.